The Egyptian Heaven and Hell by E. A. Wallis Budge. Volume 3, The Contents of the Books of the Otherworld Described and Compared. Chapter 4, the book Am-Tuat and the Book of the Gates. The principal authorities for the text of the summary of Am-Tuat are those with which Am-Tuat consulted when preparing his edition, viz. the Berlin Papyrus number 3001, the Leiden Papyrus T71, and the Lul Papyrus number 3071, the Papyrus of Turin published by Lazone, and of course the Tomb of Seti I, which gives the text of the first 6 divisions. The most valuable of all these is the Leiden Papyrus T71, of which an excellent facsimile with a complete translation, 1800s computer translation, with a complete translation, was published by Ders Pleit and Boesser in 1894. In this papyrus, the text of the summary only fills 119 short columns. I wonder what the significance is of 119. And the great popularity of the work is attested by the fact that the priests of Yemen were induced to compress all the most important portions of the Am-Tuat into so small a compass. As I've said before, I've compressed it into an even smaller package, right? I think like 12 sentences. Similar in many details, but widely different from the book Am-Tuat, in point of fundamental doctrine, is the great funeral work to which the names Book of the Lower Hemisphere, Book of Hades, Ver de l'Enfer have been given. A glance at the pictures which accompany the text of this book is sufficient to show that it deals with the passage of the sun entity, Yuf, I presume, through the otherworld during the long hours of the night. But, as M. Maspero pointed out long ago, it is wrong to call the region through which the entity passes through by the name of the lower hemispheres, for it suggests that it is below the surface of our Earth, which is not the case. And so the note 1 relates to the Boesser 1894 Papyrus Funéraire Hieroglyphique ChaIV parler dans les vertus yamé livraison des monuments égyptiens du Musée Leiden 1843. And the second note, where is the second note? Book of the Lower Hemisphere, Deveri Catalogue, Section 2, Les Livres de l'Hémisphère Inférieur, and we see the hieroglyphs Tate, Mahiam, Dwapur. Is that what it says? Forgive my French for not being pronounced right in place. There is much to be said against the titles Book of Hades and the Book of Hell, and as among the prominent characteristics which distinguish it from the Book of Am-Tuat is a series of gates, it will be convenient and more correct to call it the Book of Gates. So the hell of the afterlife is not really the realm of the spirits, now is it? But just because it's not your favored entities in the afterlife doesn't mean it's hell. The form in which we first know this work is clearly not older than the 18th or 19th dynasty, but many parts of it are very much more ancient, as the Book of Am-Tuat was composed with the view of asserting the absolute supremacy of Yemen-Ra in the otherworld, so the Book of Gates was compiled to prove that, in spite of the pretensions of the priest of Yemen-Ra, Yuthur Osiris, the ancient entity of the dead, was still the overlord of the underworld, and that his kingdom was everlasting, or so he claimed, just like gave his only son, that's that sort of thing. So the claim is, so we're talking about demiurge. And that it's the book Am-Tuat practically ignores Yasir and is silent even concerning the doctrines of the judgment and Sakat Hatepet. I think it's Tepet. I don't know if there's a variation that it's just Hatepet. Anyways, I pointed out in another one how this is, that would be the correct pronunciation. And in fact, about all the fundamental principles of the religion of Yasir as regards the dead, which had been universally believed throughout Egypt for thousands of years. Well, no matter how complete it seems, when we look into it, it seems that there's always some variation in what people believe. And particularly when it comes, even to the point of, idolatry is free and we're going to only worship this entity. There tends to be very deviance to such a claim. The most complete copy of the Book of the Gates known to us is found inscribed on the alabaster sarcophagus of Seti I, king of Egypt, about 1375 BCE, and it consists of two parts. One, a series of texts and pictures which describe the progress of the boat of the sun entity to the kingdom of Yasir and the judgment of the dead, the life of the beatified in Sakset Hatepet, the punishment of the wicked and the foes of the sun entity, Yuf, I presume. Two, a series of texts and pictures which represent the magical ceremonies that were performed in very ancient times with the view of reconstructing the body of the sun and making him rise each day. That the Book of the Gates embody many of the most ancient Egyptian religious beliefs and traditions is evident, but it's quite certain that it never became as popular as the book Am-Tuat. It must always be a matter for wonder that Seti I, having covered several walls in his tomb with text of this book, should fill several more with sections of the Book of the Gates, and have a complete copy of it cut and inlaid on the sides of his alabaster sarcophagus and its cover. And so the note, the alabaster sarcophagus of Am-Tuat I, king of Egypt, now in Sir John Swen's museum, Lincoln ink fills, drawn by Joseph Bonamy and described by Samuel Sharpe, London 1864. A description of the pictures and text was given by M-Tuat and the Revue Archéologique for 1870. Small portions of the text were discussed by Goodwin and Arnouf in Agiet Zeit 1873, page 138, and 1874, page 101. And an English rendering of the whole text is given by E. Lefebvre in the Records of the Past, volume 10, page 79, volume 12, page 1. We now consider the region which the sun entity passed during the hours of the night, and the descriptions of its division and its inhabitants which are furnished in the book Am-Tuat and the Book of the Gates, the region called by the Egyptians Dot, or Duat, or Duaut, the oldest form of the name, which is met with the earliest pyramid text, is Dot. The chief entity of the Duat was called Duat, or Duat. Ooh. The ooh here is not plural. And the beings who lived therein were called Duat per ooh, or Duat ooh. The meaning of the name Dot, or Duat is unknown, and it is useless to speculate on it or even invent etymologies for it. Useless? Well, making up things, yeah, fine. But useless? No. It was applied to the home of the beatified spirits and the damned, no doubt in pre-dynastic times, and the exact meaning which it conveyed to the minds of those who first used it has been lost. To describe its general situation is less difficult, but not many details as to its exact extent are forthcoming. To find a word which shall at once describe the situation and character of the Duat is impossible, for the reason that the Egyptian conception of the place of the departed spirits is unique. The Duat is not the lower hemisphere because it is not under the ground, and though for want of a better word I have frequently used the underworld when speaking of the Duat, it is unsatisfactory, for unless it is specially defined to mean a place of departed spirits in general, it produces a wrong impression in the mind. So certain of the spiritual realms we can visit in life, I guess. And the common forms of the name are Duatper, Dwa, Duatper, 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 Dwautper, again, the word Duat must not be rendered by Hades, or Hell, or Sheol, or Gehenna, for each of these words has a limited and special meaning, or, well, it implies things that others don't, and there's some of the problem with translations, isn't it? On the other hand, the Duat possessed the characteristics of all these names, for it was an unseen place, and contained an abysmal depths of darkness, and there were pits of fire in it, where the damned, i.e. the enemies of Yesir and Ra, were consumed. In certain parts of it were the homes of the monsters in various shapes and forms which lived upon the unfortunate creatures whom they were able to destroy. On the whole, the word Duat may be best rendered by the other world or underworld, always provided that clearly understood that the Egyptians never believed in it to be under the earth. You know, the spiritual realms aren't up, down, you know, they're overlaying the physical universe, aren't they? Or dipping into it at points. I guess it goes beyond in certain points, but in inventing a situation for the Duat, the Egyptians appear to have believed that the whole of the habitable world, that is to say Egypt, was surrounded by a chain of mountains lofty and impassable, just like the Jebel Qaf of Mohammedan writers. Muslim, it's not appropriate to, you know, okay, if a Buddhist seeks refuge with the Buddha, a Christian does things in the name of Jesus, a Mohammedan, a Muslim of any age doesn't do things in the name of their prophet. From one hole in this mountain the sun rose, and another it set. Outside this chain of mountains, but presumably quite close to them, was the region of the Duat. It ran parallel with the mountains, and was on the plain either of the land of Egypt or of the sky above it. So, let me go back, and the other world, see Maspero Eruts de Mythologie, Tome 2, page 27, and where's the second note coming in? Jebel Qaf. See Jacob's Geographical Dictionary, Ed Wustenfeld's Tome 4, page 18. On the outside of the Duat was a chain of mountains also, similar to that which encompassed the earth, and so we may say that the Duat had the shape of a valley, and from the fact that it began near the place where the sun set and ended near the place where he rose, it is permissible to say that the Duat was nearly circular in form. That this is the view taken by Egyptians themselves is provided by the scene which is represented in the Book of Gates, page 303, Here we have the body of Yasur bent around in a circle. You know, it's usually nut that's bent in a circle, but and the hieroglyphics enclosed within it declares that it is the Duat. With the identification of Yasur with the Duat, we need not deal here, but it is important for our purpose to note that in the time of Seti I, the Egyptians assumed a circular form to the Duat. The view put forward by Signor Lanzone to the effect that the Duat was the place compromised between the arms of the entity Shu and the body of the sky entity Nut, whom, according to the old legend, he raised up from the embrace of her husband, the earth entity Sab. So forming, the earth and sky thus appears to be untenable. So, again, some of these things kind of Nuit, Hadit, Raho, Kiwit, and other names for the sort of divisions here, you know, sometimes just the names change. And Lanzone did the Mexel des Spirits, page 1. Now, as the Duat was situated on the other side of the mountains which separated from Egypt, and from the sun, moon, and stars which lighted the skies of that country, it follows that it must have been a region which was shrouded in the gloom and darkness of night, and a place of fear and horror. At the end of the Duat was a space which was neither wholly darkness nor wholly light, the western end being partially lighted by the setting sun, and the eastern end by the rising sun. From the pictures in the book Yum-Duat and the Book of Gates, we learn that a river flowed through the Duat, much as the Nile flowed through Egypt, and we see that there were inhabitants on each of its banks, just as there were human beings on each side of the Nile. At one place, the river of the Duat joined the great celestial waters, which were supposed to form the source of the earthly Nile. How, or when, or where the belief arose, it is impossible to say, because it seems that at a very early period the inhabitants of Egypt thought that the souls of the dead, when they departed from this world, made their way into the Duat and took up their abode there, and long before the dynastic period the Duat was regarded throughout Egypt as the kingdom of the dead. Certain actions of it were considered to belong by traditional right to certain cities. Example, Heliopolis, Memphis, Heracleopolis, Abydos, etc., each possessing its own, the other world, and entities of the dead. And all these had to be considered by the theologians who formulated general plans of the Duat. Well, our thoughts, words, and deeds would surely crystallize in the afterlife, the reality of such, and sometimes our projections would make a difference, but when people are making up their own cosmologies of the afterlife, you know, a lot of this goes, you know, a lot of people are going to be disappointed, you know. How the Egyptians imagined the dead to live in the Duat, or upon what, is not clear, but they seem to have thought that all their wants can be provided for by the use of words of power, amulets, talismans, etc. In the earliest times of all, the souls of the dead remained in the other world, which belonged to their town or city, but when Yasur attained the supreme power over the dead, it was only natural that the departed spirit should flock from all parts of Egypt to his kingdom, wherein the beatified enjoyed a life very much like that which they lived upon earth, the celestial kingdom of Yasur, that is to say, Sekhet Hatepet, or Sekhet Yaru, was originally a copy of some very fertile region in the delta, and to the very end of the period of native Egyptian rule, the Egyptian paradise consisted of green fields intersected by streams of living, i.e., running water, with abundant crops of wheat and barley, and its appearance represented a typical middle delta landscape, so long as Yasur had his kingdom in the delta, probably near the ancient city of Mendes. The souls of the dead traveled from south to north, but at a latter period when Yusur had absorbed the position and attributes of Yamunte, perhaps the oldest entity of the dead of Abydos, departed spirits made their way from north to south, so upriver, so that they might enter the Duat by the gap in the mountains there. Still later, the Egyptians reverted to their old belief as the situation of the domain of Yusur, and the books which deal with the Duat always assume that it lies far away to the north, and were intended to guide souls on their way to it. The ultimate fate of the souls of the human beings who had departed the Duat must always have been a matter of speculation to the Egyptians, and, at the best, they could only hope that they had traversed the long, dark, and dangerous valley in safety. And I'm going to pause here again. Sharma, peace be with you.